What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Curated. As always, I'm excited, I'm happy, I'm thrilled that you are here. For those who don't know, Curated is a podcast that is all about music, fashion, creative culture, everything in between, and it's distributed across all streaming platforms. So wherever the fuck you found me from, welcome, welcome, fam. Y'all ever have like a work day that's just like off, just like really off? That was me today. It was just off, but one thing that's been on my mind in this New York heat has been actually what's been also happening in Europe with the whole heat wave situation. And follow me for a second, but it got me thinking about a recent fashion show that has been like the talk of the town, and that is the Louis Vuitton Spring Summer 2026 fashion show, which y'all probably seen. Pharrell Williams built an 8-meter tidal wave in the middle of Paris with real water, sand that was imported. Models were walking through the mist as guests were sitting in like one of the hottest days in France, and people were talking about it, okay, for many reasons. Was it the best visual representation with what was currently happening in Europe? I don't know, but I've seen plenty of videos out talking about the design of the fashion show runway. And it got me thinking, all these fashion shows have been like taken up to a whole other fucking level. Some of them don't make sense, if I'm being honest with y'all. I watch some of them and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? But yes, like fashion shows have definitely been taken up to a whole other level, an experiential level that I don't think was the case many years ago. And I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it with y'all. But before we get into it all, before we get into the glamification of fashion shows, let's do a little history on it, okay? Fashion weeks in general started in Paris back in the 1940s. And the original purpose of what a fashion week was that it was all commercial. Like designers were showing buyers what was available for an upcoming season. There were no cameras, there was no elaborate set. It was just people in a room with clothes and, here we go. What you trying to buy? That was the situation. The officialness of New York Fashion Week was like formalized in 1943 during World War II when American designers couldn't access Paris. That's how important Paris and fashion. I mean, as people know, Paris is the fashion capital of the world. That's how important it was. Like America had to literally build an entire fashion week just to compensate for not having one. And the shift from like this like commercial event where again people were coming in to view a season's work and buy, that shift from that into a cultural spectacle happened gradually throughout the 70s and the 80s as designers started to understand that the show itself was a big marketing tool. And by the 90s, we was going off. We was going off. I think the moment fashion week and the runways started to get televised, that's when it stopped becoming all about the clothes, but more about who the fuck was showing up, what did the stage look like, what was the theme, what were we talking about? And what people don't understand is that the runway is probably one of the most expensive little short films that happened that nobody really talks about, okay? There are millions of dollars that are being spent, hundreds of people showing up for like 8 minutes of a show. It's crazy. You have set designers, you have lighting directors, you have sound designers, you have choreographers, you have casting directors, venue selections. Like the clothes are one department of this like much larger, broader creative operation. And like with most things, most people don't realize that, in watching a runway show, they're watching the output of this massive production team that could rival like a small film studio. And what's super interesting is that at its core, like conceptually, something like a runway show is super cool to think about as a creative because some people really do pop off. Like some shows that I'll talk about in a little bit have been like iconic, memorable shows that truly do tell a story about what a season's designs are supposed to look like and what they're supposed to evoke. And that is what great designers build in a runway, is that they don't start with the clothes, right? They start with this feeling. What do I want the room to essentially feel like when somebody's wearing my piece of clothing? And what Fashion Week and the sets of Fashion Week and the runway shows have really done is, I think they've accentuated that ability for designers to tell the story of what the clothes are supposed to do. But like I said, some people, some of them I get it. Some of them are like, what's going on? Like, are we just going off just to go off, or like, what's happening here? But one key person that I think really was the guy who, like, it was a turning point for fashion shows, who made his mark in really allowing the world to acknowledge the show itself as a form of art, was Alexander McQueen. In spring of 1999, he introduced number 13, and it had Shalom Harlow, who was standing in like a rotating platform while two robotic arms essentially sprayed painted her white dress. It was a whole performance piece. It wasn't just a fashion show. There was a performance happening. It was giving Warhol with the little sewing machine. That truly was, in my opinion, a pivotal point into which fashion shows started to become more than just a catwalk, in a sense. So like I said, I want to tell you all, and I'll show you all some of the fashion shows that were iconic, like the shows that really proved that the runway wasn't itself an art form, that the runway wasn't itself a tool to get more eyes and more exposure, and a tool to tell a designer's story. There are a few iconic runway moments that like redefine the whole form of what a runway show was like. Back to my boy Alexander McQueen, okay? The Atlantis Spring Show of 2010. This was a final completed collection before his death. The models were in these like otherworldly sculptural looks. The entire set design was made to feel like it was the bottom of the ocean. The show ended with like a holograph of Kate Moss dissolving into thin air inside this like pyramid of light. Unfortunately, Alexander McQueen did die before the show aired publicly, and the hologram in a way became like his goodbye without him knowing. But Kate Moss disappearing into light probably has got to be like one of the most haunting things that the runway has ever done and produced. And it wasn't a planned farewell, but in a way it felt like it. And that's the thing about Alexander McQueen. As I've learned more about him, I've learned that his shows had substance, had weight to them, things that you couldn't really explain while he was alive, but like could not ignore after he was gone. Now, the Chanel Fall Winter 2014 show, which is probably the one that I remember the most. Not that I was watching fashion shows back in the day, because I barely watch them now, if I'm being honest with y'all. 'Cause sometimes I'm like, I mean, it's cute, it's cute to look at clothes that I myself cannot fucking afford. And again, I do it for the culture, trying to see what's up. What do we go? Where are we heading with fashion, according to designers out there? But one of the shows that always shows up in social media for me for some fucking reason is the Fall Winter 2014 supermarket show by Chanel. So Karl Lagerfeld, his team transformed the Grand Palace into this 139,000 square foot supermarket labyrinth. It took each model 4.5 minutes to transverse the supermarket, and the whole thing was stocked with these Chanel branded merchandise, doormats, paint pots, chainsaws, Pringles, Cocoa Pops, bath salts. Like it was a full-on thought out supermarket. And even the guests their seats were fashioned out of cardboard boxes. What was truly fucking iconic about the show is that like a closing announcement that was made created a stampede of audience members when they ran towards the runway, clamoring all the giveaways, because they said, The shopping center will be closing shortly. Please help yourself to complimentary fruit, veg, and please come again. Yo, imagine sitting in that show. And then they're like, oh yeah, pull up, grab whatever you want. Grab all this really cool stage design that we've created for this show that again is like one of a kind type of shit that you're never gonna find anywhere else. Like what a fucking icon. What an icon. Lagerfeld is putting this like $12,000 shopping basket next to a box of Cocoa Puffs. And he's like, yeah, what about it? You know? I think at its core, the set, like, of course, it being just iconic as shit, like, wasn't a commentary on fashion, but overall on consumption and how absurd he thought and the world thought of luxury, of how close like haute couture and a grocery one could actually be when you strip away all of the mythology around it. And then at the end, of course, the audience is running crazy to get their hands on free produce. Like he proved the point there too, you know? Again, if I'm showing here a few screenshots of the show, but like if y'all have some time after this, go watch these shows. I think most of them are on YouTube. They're just crazy, crazy cool shows. The third one I want to talk about is another Chanel show, and this is from spring summer 2015. This is Boulevard Chanel. This is one season after the iconic supermarket. It's the same venue, completely different statement that's being made with this. Production was this 130-meter long catwalk set as Boulevard Chanel, which was staging a fashion protest. Lagerfeld's team created an urban cityscape with building facades, terraces, pavements, the puddles, like everything. The fashion show was being led by Cara Delevingne, Icon, Giselle, and the models essentially were marching down the catwalk together. They were carrying these placards that said things like "Ladies first," "Women's rights are more than a right," and "History is her story." Signs that also read things like "Tweed is better than tweet." So one season, my boy Carl is over here making fun of luxury and consumption, and the next, he's out here building a feminist protest inside, an exclusive fashion show event. Kendall Jenner, Giselle, they're marching for women's rights on a runway that probably costs more to build than like most people's houses, okay? And you have to ask yourself, like, is it sincere? Is it satire? Is it both? And I think the fact that nobody could like agree on exactly what the fuck was going on was maybe the point, you know? Lagerfeld, like, I feel like a lot of designers and creative directors now realizes that the most powerful thing that a runway can do is to start a conversation outlasted by the show itself, outlasted by the clothes themselves. Two Chanel shows back to back, same venue, completely like different stories being told, and both of them sparked a fucking conversation. And that's, I think, what separates just a designer versus like a creative director and an artist. But okay, the last one that I want to talk about is Rick Owens and his long game show. Alexander McQueen, Karl Lagerfeld, and plus many of the creative directors and designers of today, they're creating these shows, individual landmark moments. Rick Owens, on the other hand, he spent 20 years treating every single show as this continuous like artistic statement. The spring summer 20 well, what would be 2027? I don't know. I don't if you start asking me about actual technicalities, I'm not your boy. Okay? I'm just a little bit of an explorer of fashion, as you say. There are other people, let me just preface that by saying this, there are other people much more well equipped to be talking about fashion history and everything. I'm just a little spectator, you know what I mean? We're just here to chit chat a little bit and get educated on a tiny sliver of it. But anyways, I don't know what it was, spring, summer 2017 or 2027 or 2026. I don't know what the right term is here. There's this like enormous ramp that's erected across the forecourt's front pool of the Palais de Tokyo. Fountains are looped all over the runway. Guests, models are all getting, a little spray of mist. And that's what recently happened. Okay, that if you go back to his shows from like way earlier, you'll find the same kind of DNA. The Palace of Tokyo is the kind of the forecourt of his it serves as his like permanent canvas here. His wife, Michelle Lamy, is performing on the runway. Models are carrying other models on their backs. The audience is in a way becoming part of the piece. What Owens is building, if you go back and watch his runway shows, is not just a show, it's this ongoing body of work that happens to involve clothing. And so all these shows, again, after this, go put some fucking YouTube videos on and indulge yourself in a little bit of what I'm talking about, because you'll be like, God damn, we was popping off. But all this brings us to the right now, right? Paris Fashion Week just happened, and what's going down as time goes, I think, is clear evidence that the runway shows are continuing to evolve into something that like Fashion Week was never really designed to be, but it's just becoming. There are 3 shows that I want to point out that, at least for me, have been like resurfacing all across social media. And that's another thing. I feel like I feel like there's a whole other segment and podcast that I could be talking about as it comes to like influencers and creatives at these events, and like the shift that I think is happening. It's a whole thing. Not a complete idea that I have right here, but something worth thinking about, because the only way that I think I've at least been consuming this year's like Paris Fashion Week has been on social media from influencers and other creators who were there capturing the moment. But like I mentioned at the top of this video, the wave, okay, this spring summer 2027. I'm gonna claim to that because I think that's right. I don't think most people on social media are talking about the clothes. Although the Vans situation that was happening between Pharrell's like design for some shoes that he made, and look that shit up too, because that one was interesting. But I think people are talking more about the runway that was built. Like I said, this 8-meter high, 37-meter wide wave that has real water from the Eau de Paris municipal network. They're cascading into these pools at the base while these models are like walking through the mist on this fine sand that was imported for this specific event. So this set was designed by Bureau Betak. Probably not saying that right. It has this big ass sculpture that is continuously spilling water with sandy pathways, and models are moving, through the wave outwards, carrying luggage, accessories. I think Louis Vuitton is so has a rich historic connection to travel, and so of course like a lot of the accessories that are carried out throughout the show are like luggage items. And I think this time around it takes a different tail. It's more of like a spring summer vibe type of travel. It's like the surf inspired lens. Guest list, okay? I feel like I could spend a whole other section talking about guests and how that whole thing gets figured out. But some people that were in attendance: Jeremy Allen White, Jackson Wang, J Hope, Quavo. You got a gospel choir that's performing, new music that's debuted, and then the sand apparently was repurposed for a beach volleyball on campus after, which I'm sure some fucking hypebeasts out there are probably getting bags of that sand and trying to sell it online. I bet you all. Look that shit up. I'm sure somebody's selling it out there. And the water apparently went back to the Paris like sewer system for a closed circuit, which was a whole thing too. Okay, I know there's discourse online about whether that whole scenery of water and mist was the right move given the literal massive heat wave that is happening in Europe at the moment. And like I see it, and I think it's one thing that like I would love to ask actual like creative directors and stage designers and people who work on this for like maybe years, months in advance, how something like this like can you do you even have a backup plan? Like, are there pivots that you can make when something like this happens? Because it's just bad timing, if that makes sense. Like, it's the and I'm sure they like the team didn't anticipate that it happened, but the way that things crossed over, of course, like painted this narrative for the show, then I'm curious, like, do people who actually work in the industry know like what it would take for somebody to have a plan B in place, or is that a thing that people consider? Like, I don't know. But anyways, we all know that Pharrell, icon in music production. I will say the guy's just an icon, period. Like, I hope that at some point I become nearly as cool as Pharrell Williams in my life, because he's just done so much cool shit that I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. But he's known very much so for his music production, right? The music industry has been navigating the like attention economy for much longer than fashion. We can say that. And I think Pharrell has learned that in music, the most valuable currency is not necessarily the record, but the cultural moment that surrounds it, right? Like, listen to any Pharrell record, and you just know there's something about it that creates just a moment. He's coming from an industry that I think figured this out 30 years ago, and he's applying that same logic to a different format, and it's working the same way. Of course, like I said, whether it was received well or not, I think people are talking about the wave, the sand, the heat, the gospel choir, like it's all creating noise. And like I said, it does honestly feel like clothes have become secondary in a way to a lot of fashion shows, which it can be a criticism if there are certain shows where like the clothes are not good, but when they are good, hey, a compliment in a sense, right? And I'm curious, like if you all are watching these shows, like what's your take on a show like the Louis Vuitton show? The fashion is comparable as the hype that maybe the set and the actual show had. I don't know. It's a taste thing for sure, because people have different opinions about whether, clothing items being displayed hit or not. But it's an interesting thing to think about. Like, has this shift towards paying a lot of attention to the stage design take away from the clothes? Does it add to the clothes? I think at the beginning, the reason for it was to accentuate the storytelling of what the season's clothes were intended to tell. But we're now hitting this like next level situation. You know what I mean? Now we're really locked in to these these set designs. Now I know I mentioned that I talk about some other shows, so I'm gonna go through the next two pretty quick, because I feel like I've been rambling about fucking nothing for the past like 30 minutes. Saint Laurent and the fog. Saint Laurent gets to open Fashion Week, and we have for their spring summer 2027 menswear show. It's staged amongst the Fujiko Nakaya's Cloud 07156. Yes, I had to read that shit. It's an installation that's currently displayed in the tidal Ando designed rotunda of Bourse de Commerce. You French people really got me fucked up, okay? Essentially, it's this installation that turns the space into a landscape of fog. A little bit of a contrast from what the Louis Vuitton show is, of like them trying to create a world from scratch at the enormous expense, I'm sure. Saint Laurent, on the other hand, is walking into an existing installation and making their collection around it. And both with good reason are spectacles. Like, neither is wrong. They're just different answers to the same question. In a previous episode, we talked about concept albums. And in 2026, it's feeling like the fashion show is asking the same question, right? It's asking, what can this format do that hasn't been done yet? How can we restructure the format of what a fashion show looks like to get people's attention? And it does beg the question as to whether, these extravagant events, like what's the point? I do ask myself that a lot of times, because some of them do tell a story. Others, sometimes I'm watching them and I'm like, what the fuck is going on, And again, for the ateliers, the designers, the people who worked tirelessly to make the season's collection, what is their input? What is their say on this? Is it building on top of an existing story that they've created? Does it take away from the clothes? But I think regardless, the people who are winning, the designers, the creators who are winning, are the ones who are treating this event like a total experience rather than just a commercial presentation of clothes. And the most interesting part of it all to me is understanding that really interesting creative work happens when someone is taking logic from a different form and applying it to another. So, Pharrell, and just how iconic he is known as a music producer and what he's created, bringing that type of logic into an LB show. Alexander McQueen, bringing theater into the runway. Lagerfeld, bringing this idea of like cultural criticism, and Rick Owens with performance art. What's super interesting is that, as I'm talking about this, the people who tend to change a format are most often the people who didn't grow up like inside of it. They're outsiders who coming into this thing not knowing what the fuck to do. And there's criticism in that itself, right? I feel like a lot of fashion historians out there and people who have been following brands for years will see things like Pharrell becoming a creative director or an ASAP Rocky, you know, coming into these spaces. And to some of them, yes, it comes through as like they don't know what they're doing. But to others, it's like, oh shit, they're bringing a different perspective that is changing how we're seeing and how we're experiencing this form. And it begs the question, like, truly, outside of what I'm just talking about, because this more took a complete turn in the last like 2 minutes. But I am curious if there are any other like art forms, I guess, that we've all treated as like a fixed idea that you're like, oh, if this person came into this space having a completely different background, like they might just blow it completely open. Like I'm sure there's a lot of spaces like that, right? I think of somebody like Rosalia, who she's done a few of these things. And again, we're deviating out here, y'all. I'm losing y'all as I say this because now I'm on a different wavelength. But Rosalia, I feel like if she was an actress, y'all bitches could never. Like seriously, having seen her in a few things that she's like been a guest star in, Rosalia is that girl. Rosalia is a theater girly at heart. I know for sure. But back to this whole thing. Are there any fashion shows from this season or past seasons that you've all have just been like, that is a fashion show? Let me know. Drop it in the comments. If anything, I'll try to maybe make a little playlist and link it to the videos of some of the fashion shows that I mentioned in here so that you can all watch them because it's a treat. It's a treat. Now, I promised myself that I would not forget to do this, but now that we're coming to the end of the podcast episode, I want to tell you all something. If you've never seen, heard of me, know of me, I have this collective called CUERATED. And the whole premise behind it was that I just wanted to have a space and a hub for creatives by creatives. I wanted to just have a place where, I don't know, we can talk, we can ideate, we can discuss, we can inspire each other as it pertains to anything that is in the creative space. Right now, the podcast is one portion of it. I have a newsletter, which is one of the things that I want to talk about. If you're not signed up for a newsletter, on Mondays, for the most part, I try to give you all a weekly digest of what's currently happening in music, fashion, art, everything in between, in a little short newsletter, super digestible. I've spent 7 years of my life working in email marketing, so like I know you all that most of the shit that you're getting in your box is absolute crap. And my whole goal with this newsletter was to not give you shit. You know what I mean? To give you something that you truly were like, okay, I look forward to opening this email every Monday and getting my cultural fix, you know? So sign up for the newsletter. I'll include a link down in the comments or bio or whatever the fuck. The other thing is, I currently work for a magazine company, and one that I have gotten to learn a lot about, but I've always wanted to make something tangible with the work that I'm doing. And so I know there's a lot of smaller publications out there for magazines, but I don't have the means or the resources at this moment to make my own magazine. And whoever, that's a future state dream of mine. But I created a zine, or I'm in the midst of creating a zine. And It is a zine that is all about mm, this concept of anhedonia, which is when you lose essentially the passion for things that you used to have before. I've been going through a phase of that, I would say, for the past maybe like 4 years of my life when it comes to things that I used to do with music. I used to be really into writing music. I still to this day want to be a singer. Who knows, that'll happen, but like that's a dream that I've always had. I had a big big love for writing music because it was like therapy for me. Like anytime I was going through something in life, I would grab my little blue book and I would write shit. Like I would just write it all out and make a fucking song. Like there was no day where I didn't hit up my keyboard and fuck around with it to make some sort of melody. Like I was in it. And then I would say maybe like 4 years ago, things just started to not happen. Like I just wasn't picking up my pen and paper. I wasn't hitting up the keyboard. And it's consistently been like that now for 4 years. And for a long time, I kept beating myself about it. I was like, what the fuck is it? Like, why can't I write music? The zine, which is a short, like 12-page zine, is all about, it's like six little sections that talk about this concept of losing your creative life in a sense, losing a portion of yourself that you've always found enjoyment for, and a pathway to rediscovering it. Because I I feel like many of us in this age of mid 20s, early 30s, we're all, I feel like, going through the same shit, where we all used to have these hobbies, these things that lived outside of the corporate space that we lost a sense for. And we've just become, honestly, quite depressed, sad people because of that. And so, my goal with this zine is to just provide my into what my life has been like going through that and still going through it, but also the ways that I've found the ability to reframe my thinking and find my way back to certain aspects of my life. Because for a long time, and I feel like still to today, I question whether I am a creative person, and my 9 to 5 drains me, I would say, sometimes of my ability to spend the time to be creative and follow those passions. And this zine, I think, is like culmination of all of those thoughts, like put together into something tangible. That all this is to say, sometime in August, it's coming out. I'm only limiting it to 50 copies. If anything, probably less than that. And the goal is just to create, in the first place, something like this that I've always wanted to. But at the same time, half of the proceeds of the zine will go to an organization that is tied thematically to what I'm talking about in this like first issue, which is the build of creative spaces, the build of your creative self. And so half the proceeds will go to an org that's helping do that. And then half of them will go back to making an issue number 2. So if you at all are interested in what I just blabbered about for a good 4 or 5 minutes, sign up for the newsletter, because that'll be the way that I let everybody who signed up for the newsletter be the first ones to know about the pre-sale. Or tap the fuck in. Just go to curated.net. You'll see like a little zine section in there that'll tell you pretty much what issue number 1 is about, and you'll also be able to sign up for the pre-sale. So after all that, you have to, you have to do your little promo, okay? You can't just sit there and, spread all this wealth of knowledge with y'all without plugging myself in a little bit, all right? Do me a favor. If anything, if all you do, just give this a thumbs up or share it or something. That'd be great. But anyways, I appreciate y'all listening, and I will catch you on the next one.